Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we've got, after a little bit of a wait, but especially after the Christmas wait and some things, we have got our next part in our Planet Zoo mod spotlight, where we take a look at a bunch of wonderful mods people have been making, and just really appreciate the natural world. So, really awesomely, we've got lots of bird today. I think we've got 6 birds, 3 mammals. So I think all of you bird lovers, I know Rihanna, who made the first couple of mods, she's going to love this. So I know all of you guys are going to love it, especially if you're bird nerds. So yeah, we are going to get started with the Edwards pheasant done by the aforementioned Rihanna. So also known as the Vietnamese pheasant. Let me grab a good image or the wonderful guy here. So these guys are a pheasant that are only found in the rainforests of Vietnam, hence the name the Vietnamese pheasant. And they were first described by science quite recently in about 1896 by French ornithologist Alphonse Miles Edward, hence the name the Edwards pheasant. And you can see the bird's length here was probably about 58 to 65 centimeters, so that's the general size range of an adult, or 23 to 26 inches. And you can see it has red legs and also red facial skin. It really gives it that distinct look. And the male has this mainly blue and black crest, while the female that we'll grab over here, like most other pheasants, she's quite a drab brown. Still beautiful nonetheless, so you can see the compared to the really bright male. So there is also believed to be 2 varieties, but the taxonomy on this is kind of neither here nor there, because there's the nominant form, which is usually called the Vietnamese pheasant, which is Lophora edwardsi or Edwardsi and Edwardsi. So that's the nominate subspecies. And then there's the northern form, which is found to be kind of a little bit different, but this actually could be a result of inbreeding, because a lot of the features that define the northern subspecies or the northern form is seen in captive ones that have been inbred. So that could potentially just be a result of populations inbreeding, since they are, as I'm going to get into, critically endangered. So in 2012, these guys were listed as critically endangered by BirdLife International for lots of reasons, including deforestation, hunting, and the use of in the Vietnam War. So that's really affected their population. The population is currently believed to be between 50 and 249 in the wild, sadly. We'll have a look at the babies while we're talking about that. Really cute anyway, but they seem to be doing well in captivity due to ex situ conservation. So a lot of the breeding programs in captivity have been helping to keep the species alive. And there actually has been no confirmed sighting of a living individual in the wild since between 2000 and 2010. And the World Pheasant Association has received funding to try and protect this animal, and survey it in certain areas of Vietnam to help protect it. And the Phuong Den Nature Reserve was initially designated to protect these guys after they rediscovered the species in that area in 1996. And in 2018, believe it or not, they found a dead female Edwards pheasant that was taken in the Ao Luang district, including parts of Phuong Den, which means this is the first evidence of a wild Edwards pheasant in almost 2 decades. And this also implicates that there may be other individuals and the species is still present in that reserve. So that's very interesting. But again, it was made by Rihanna or Ronmayron. And she also made the next species, which is another critically endangered bird, but not a pheasant. This one's a megapode. So we've got the malleow, which is a really cool animal here. So the malleow is a large megapode that is found only on the island of Sulawesi and the nearby island of Buton in Indonesia. So still kind of in that Southeast Asia range. And they're typically found in tropical lowlands and hill forests, but nest in open sandy areas, volcanic soils, and beaches. So that's a very interesting part of their ecology, because they kind of use the sun or geothermal activity to help incubate their eggs. So that's very interesting. So they generally reach from 55 to 60 centimeters or 22 to 24 inches long in length, with this really blackish plumage that you see here, bare yellow facial skin, reddish-brown irises, reddish-orange beak, and these rosy salmon underparts. And you can see the crown here is kind of a dark carapace, quite bony as well, it's prominent. And the greyish blue feet also have these long claws, which are separated by a membrane. And the sexes are almost indistinguishable from each other, unlike most other birds, but generally the females are a little bit duller and slightly smaller, so that's the way to tell them apart. And juvenile birds also have large brownish and pale heads with more pale underparts. It'll never look like that. So this is what a baby one looks like. So in terms of the breeding ecology, that's what makes them weird. So they have very large eggs, which is actually about 5 times as large as a domestic chicken, even though they're probably comparable in size. The female lays and covers each egg in a deep hole in the sand that allows the incubation to take place through both solar or volcanic heating. And after the eggs hatch, the young birds work their way up through the sand and hide in the forest, kind of like a turtle. So that's very, very interesting for birds. The young birds are actually able to fly. They're precocial, so they're totally independent and able to fly when they're born. They're ready to go right out the box. And they must find food for themselves and defend themselves from predators such as monitor lizards, wild pigs, cats, reticulated pythons, and a lot of those predators that live in the area. And Melial, in terms of their breeding, they are monogamous, and the pair will stay close to each other at one time. And generally, they are pretty generalist in their diet. They eat mainly fruits, mollusks, seeds, ants, termites, smaller vertebrates, and beetles. So really whatever they can get their mouths around, they're quite generalist. And yeah, there seems to be, with a big issue with these guys is nest poaching and converting the land they live on for agriculture. So that's a big thing. Out of the known nesting grounds, there's only 4 that are considered non-threatened. So 142 that are known for nesting grounds, and only 4 are not threatened. So that's been a big issue, especially with egg poaching and deforestation and the land converting to agriculture. So it's really been affecting the species. Also, wildfires have cleared large areas of forest where these guys would live. And there's also been increasing isolation between different breeding habitats and living habitats. So really it's kind of been isolating them further. And since 1972, these guys have been protected by the Indonesian government. And in 2005, it was only estimated to be about 4,000 to 7,000 breeding pairs alive. And they were declining rapidly. And that's why they are considered critically endangered. And I believe they are considered critically endangered now, at least. But they have been luckily trying to put conservation efforts in place. Obviously, they've been protected. They're trying more ways to protect their areas because we don't really want to severe decline of these guys because they're very, very unique, very interesting. That's a female, and you can see the male here. So they're very, very cool birds. So yeah, again, that was done by Rihanna. She did a really good job with these. The pheasant and the megapode, really, really awesome. And now we've got another one from Nawala. He's been kind of sleeping, but he came up with a really, really cool bird, kind of good theming because like you have turkey at Christmas and Thanksgiving. So here we have got the eastern wild turkey. So really, really interesting. Obviously very famous. So the wild turkey is an upland ground bird that is native to North America and one of the 2 extant species of turkey. We've already covered the ocellated turkey. And is the ancestor of the domestic turkey, which originated from a Mexican subspecies of these guys. So you can see these adult turkeys, especially these wild ones, have kind of these long reddish and yellow and grayish legs. And you can see they're generally brown overall and dark. And sometimes grey. Adult males, you can see they have, which are called toms or gobblers. They have these large wattles here that are like red and featherless, kind of for display. And the head also has fleshy growths called carnosaurs, I believe you pronounced that. And an adult male usually has that as kind of a way to show his breeding age. And juvenile males are called jakes, and the difference between an adult male and a juvenile is that the jake has a very short beard, and his tail fan has longer feathers in the middle. So this is clearly a big male, as you told about that. So these guys can get pretty big. An adult male, or a tom, can get between 5 and 11 kilos, or 11 to 24 pounds, and measure 100 to 125 centimeters, or 39 to 49 centimeters in length. Or an adult female, a hen, is typically much smaller at between 2.5 and 5.4 kilograms, or 5.5 to 11.9 pounds, and is about 76 to 95 centimeters, or 30 to 37 inches in length. and their average weight is typically about 7.6 kilograms. And they also have quite a large wingspan, so they can get between 1.25 and 1.44 meters, so 4'1" to 4'9", so that's quite a big wingspan. But typical for a galliform, but for most birds that is a small wingspan, but big for a galliform, since these guys are not the most impressive flyers. And also have a short neck. And the biggest adult male turkey, I think, being recorded, weighed about 16.85 kilograms, or through 37.1 pounds, with records of ones getting over 13 kilos, common but not rare. So really, they're among the largest North American birds. They're really in the kind of same size range as things like the white pelican, the trumpeter swan, things like that. And a really big comparable in that group. Have a look at the females where they are. Here's a female. So these guys live in hardwood and conifer hardwood forests, and also love scattered openings such as pastures, fields, orchards, and seasonal marshes. So they live in these kind of semi-open habitats and also these conifer forests, and they will feed on all sorts of things like a red oak and cherry and beech and things like that. Very, very generalist bird. They live a lot over the eastern United States and also down into Mexico. And some populations, I believe, there are in the west. And they create lots of vocalizations, like the gobble gobble that everyone knows of them. And as I mentioned, they are omnivorous, so they will feed on acorns, nuts, such as hazelnuts, pinyon pine, also seeds, berries, like juniper. They also will occasionally consume amphibians and small reptiles, like salamanders and small snakes, things like that. And they actually seem to reach large numbers in small areas because they're able to forage for different types of food, and they typically forage between the late afternoon and early morning. They like to forage in the late afternoon and early morning. That's kind of the times they like to forage. So these guys are polygamous, with males mating with as many hens as they can. They'll display to each other, like strut their stuff, they'll puff out their feathers and try and impress the female. And when the female's finished, she'll be mated with and she goes to find a nest site. She'll typically find a place that's deep with woody vegetation, and the hens will usually lay a clutch of about 10 to 14 eggs, which is usually about one per day, and these eggs are incubated for at least 28 days. And the poults, or the chicks, are precocial, which means they will pretty much be ready, as I mentioned, right out the box. And they leave the nest between 12 and 24 hours after being hatching. So that's pretty cool. And they actually have some positive relationships with other animals. So turkeys are often known to forage with deers and squirrels. And contrary to their reputation of being stupid and vapid, they may even play with them. And by foraging together, they can help detect different different predators, because the deer have better smell and the turkeys have better sight. And the squirrels also are being able to climb. They have an aerial advantage, so that might be a good way for them to directly show off and find each other. So that's really, really interesting. They also have very many predators. They are eaten a lot by raccoons, skunks, especially nests and nestlings and eggs are eaten by skunks, groundhogs, gopher snakes, pine snakes, and adults are usually taken by bald eagles, Cooper's hawks. And these big males, or the adult male toms, can be taken by goshawks, domestic cats, red foxes, Canada lynxes, American alligators, things like that. So they're quite a common prey item for a lot of species. And the wild turkey population used to range from 1957, range from Arizona, southeastern Oklahoma, all through Tennessee, south of Florida. So they had quite a big range. And a California turkey is also an extinct species that lived in the other side of America, on the east coast, from the early Holocene and Pleistocene, and became extinct about 10,000 years ago. And the present population is descended from these eastern wild turkeys. And there was a big issue with these guys. They kind of, like, deforestation, everything kind of just wiped them out. And it's estimated that population may have been as low as 30,000 in the late 1930s. And during the 1940s, they were almost completely extirpated from Canada, and they only lived in very restricted areas. But luckily, there was a lot of attempts such as hand rearing birds and really trying to help bring up the population. Some really good conservation work. It's now estimated that their population is about 7 million, so that's really a good conservation story, how we went from 30,000 to 7 million. And there have been attempts to introduce them in different areas, such as like Hawaii and New Zealand, obviously for food and hunting. So yeah, very, very interesting. I think these guys are really, really cool, and Narola did a really great job. So now we're going to move it on from turkeys. We've done all our galliforms and that. Now we're moving on to some cranes. So this is going to be very, very nice one. So this was by BongoHardwood. We have got the Bulgur crane, or the Broger crane. We can have a look here. Really, really wonderful. Also known as the Australian crane, or the native companion, which is quite a cute name. These guys are a pretty common water bird that is found around tropical and southeastern Australia and New Guinea. And you can see they're quite tall, upright birds. They have a small head, a long beak, and slender neck and long legs. And you can see their plumage is mostly grey with black-white tips, and they have an orange-red band across the head that you can see here. Really, really interesting. And they have a very famous courting dance, which is very similar to that of other cranes, and is very well recognized by Australians. And they typically build their nest in wetland vegetation, either in an elevated place or a piece of land, or floating in shallow water and marshlands, and usually only produce only 2 eggs, with incubation taking about 32 days, and the newly born babies are precocial, as I mentioned, ready to go right out the box. And these guys, as adults, are pretty omnivorous, so they pretty much eat everything. They'll eat plant matter, invertebrates, and small vertebrates as well. And in terms of their conservation, they're not considered endangered over most of their range, though some populations show some decline, especially in southern Australia, and they have local protections in some areas, but they are generally, as a whole, considered doing well, so they're considered least concern. And these guys can get pretty big. A full-grown Broger crane can get about a height from 0.7 to 1.4 meters, or 2 foot to 4 foot, and have a wingspan of 1.7 to 2.4 meters, or 5 foot to 7 foot 10, so quite big. Adult males typically have an average body mass of about 6.8 kilograms, with females getting up to 5.66 on average. The weight range can range from 3 to 8 kilograms, or 7 to 19 pounds, and extreme heights of up to 1.8 meters, or 5 foot 11, and male Bulgur cranes have been reported, but not necessarily confirmed, so they can get quite big. So as I mentioned, they are pretty widespread. They can be found around North and Northeastern Australia, especially far northeastern Queensland, and also Victoria. And they also are found in New Guinea, and can be rare vagrants into New Zealand and northern parts of Western Australia. And the population is believed to be between 20,000 and 10,000, 100,000 birds in the southern Australia, and in southern Australia about 1,000 birds, so generally about 50,000 is probably a good estimate. The number of individuals in New Guinea is unknown, and until 1961 they were thought to be the only species of crane into Australia, until a Surrey's crane was found in Queensland. So as I mentioned, they are pretty generalist. They'll feed on pretty much everything: grains, insects, mollusks, crustaceans, pretty much everything like that. And they're usually monogamous, or they're very similar to that, and their social units are very similar to that of Saurus cranes. So they're typically breeding areas. They'll defend territories against other Bulgur cranes, and they will remain in that territory with their chicks. And non-breeding birds will kind of not really have breeding territories and kind of do their own thing. They'll gather in large flocks, which appear to be many self-contained groups, and fly around looking for food. So very, very interesting. And as I mentioned, they are considered least concern because they have a large range with a large population. And we'll have a look at the babies while we're talking about them. Really, really cute babies there, I think. But in general, they are considered least concern, with the population being more than 10,000 individuals, though there have been some talk about listing them as vulnerable, because there have been some population declines across their range for a lot of reasons, such as habitat destruction, such as the spread of blue gum in their breeding habitats, also the draining of their wetland habitats, collision with power lines, burning and grazing regimes, the spread of invasive species, especially in Australia this is a big issue, and the harvesting of eggs. So there have been some measures to also undertaken to protect them, such as reintroduction, habitat maintenance, legal protections, research. So they are kind of doing well, but they could very possibly not end well for the Bulgur crane. But really, really cool bird. Again, it was done by BongoHardwood. And this next one, we got another crane, and a really pretty crane in my opinion. We have got the red crown crane, also known as, I think, the Japanese crane, I think? Yeah, the Japanese crane, even though it's not only found in Japan. Really, really wonderful species here. So these guys are named because they have this red patch of bare skin here that's kind of a red crown. I think that fits their name rather well. And overall they have this really snowy white color with dark black spots around here, especially around their tail feathers and their neck. Very, very beautiful. And they're actually among the largest and heaviest cranes, and they typically measure around 150 to 158, 4 foot 11 to 5 foot 2 inches tall, and about 101 to 150 centimeters, or 3 feet 4 to 4 foot 11 in length. And they have a large wingspan. They typically measure between 220 to 250 centimeters, or 7 foot 3 to 8 feet 2. And their typical body weight is about 4.8 to 10.5 kilograms, or 11 to 23 pounds, with males on average being slightly larger than the females. And their weight is often higher just prior to their migration, as they get big and fat to help to over-migrate. And they're actually on average the heaviest crane species, although the Saurus and the wattle crane can get taller and exceed them in linear measurements, but on average they are the largest. And yeah, pretty big. And as I mentioned, they're migratory. So the migratory populations of the red crown crane live in Siberia and breed in Siberia, about eastern Russia, northeastern China, and occasionally in northeastern Mongolia. And the breeding range centers in Lake Kanaka, which is on the border between China and Russia. And normally these cranes, as we talk about the babies, we'll move over here, talk about the baby. It's very, very cute. So typically they lay 2 eggs with only 1 surviving, and later in fall they'll migrate down to the Korean peninsula in east central China, where they spend the winter. And they've also been reported as vagrants in Japan. And in addition to those populations, there is a resident population that lives in Horoko, Japan. And these species like to live in like wetlands, marshes, and rivers. And in the wintering range, they feed mainly on, their habitat consists mainly of paddy fields and tidal flats, also mud flats. And in the flats, they will feed on aquatic vertebrates. And if it gets too cold and snowy, the birds will switch to living on rice paddies. That probably helps their survival. And as I mentioned, like other cranes, they have quite a omnivorous diet, so they don't really have too much of a preference. They'll eat rice, acorns, wheat, and a variety of water plants. And in terms of animal matter, they'll eat goldfish and carp, salamanders, dragonflies, small reptiles, small mammals, and even small ducklings and other small birds. So they tend to not really care, but they seem to prefer being carnivorous. So take with that as you will. Very, very dangerous. And they seem to be, compared to other cranes, they have a smaller, they seem to have small numbers of the red crown crane, and given their carnivorous diet, they've kind of spread out more, and they tend not to be in as large groups, also being endangered as well. Groups can be up to 80 individuals of unrelated cranes, and even when they're not nesting, they tend to be quite aggressive to each other and try and maintain a distance of 2 to 3 meters, or 6.6 to 9.8 feet, to keep out of the pecking range from other roosting individuals. And they reach breeding maturity. We'll have a look at the parents. They reach breeding maturity at about 3 to 4 years old, and all mating and egg laying is largely restricted to April to early May. And they'll often display to each other and pair bond, as well as advertise their territories, to defend their territories, of course, for their breeding. And they're quite territorial during their breeding. Their nesting territory can be between 1 and 7 kilometers, or 0.39 to 2.70 square miles, and often at the same time after year, so they will maintain that same territory. They're most of these territories have like a flat terrain, access to wetland habitat and tall grasses, And nest sites can be selected by the females and built by both sexes. And sometimes these nests are built on frozen surface of water, as the frigid temperatures may persist well into the nesting season, though they like to just have it on water in general. Nest building takes about a week, and once they do that, they incubate the eggs for about 30 days, and they both feed the young when they hatch and stay with the nest for the next few weeks of life. And then the young start to follow their parents into the marshes as they forage at about 3 months of age. And only 4, so about 95 days after hatching, the young have fledged, and they fly with the migration, and they can fly well. And the cranes will remain with their parents for about 9 months. And young also may have like a higher pitched voice that they try to use to distinguish themselves from adult birds, so they can get their parents. And the average lifespan of these guys is about 30 to 40 years, with some specimens living up to 75 years in captivity, and is believed to be one of the longest living birds. That's very, very interesting in my opinion. So the population has been split into these populations, like the migratory one and the non-migratory one, and they're very, very rare. The estimated total population is believed to be about 1,830 in the wild, and include about 950 birds from the resident Japan population. And of the migratory population, about 400 to 500 winter in China, and a remaining 1,000 to 1,050 in China, and that's why they're considered endangered. And there's actually been breeding with them, especially in the National Aviary in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They ran a program where the US zoos donated eggs, which were flown from Russia and raised in national reserves and released to the wild, and they've sent over 150 eggs between 1995 and 2005, so they've done quite a lot for their conservation. And they have been considered, especially in South Korea, they're now considered a national monument and a first-class endangered species, so they get all the protections that go with that, and really, really awesome birds in general, I think. So, yeah, sadly endangered, vulnerable, but there is some really good conservation programs in place to protect them. And this one was also done by BongoHardwood. So now we're going to move on to the next one, our last bird for today. We have got the Humboldt penguin by Leif and Nicholas Lion Rider. So look at these wonderful Humboldt penguins. This one's been a while in the making. So these guys are a medium-sized penguin that live in South America, mainly being found in the Pengu de Humboldt Natural Reserve in the north of Chile, or they live their range consists of most of the coastal Peru, and their closest living relatives are the African penguin, the Magellan penguin, and the Galapagos penguin. And these guys love the cold water currents that swim in both as well, especially the one that goes across Chile, and is named after the explorer Alexander von Humboldt. Hence the name Humboldt penguin. And the species is listed as vulnerable, and there's no really recovery plan in place for them. Where the current population is estimated to be 32,000 individuals, and is going down sadly, and is a migrant species. They tend to really hang out on islands or rocky coasts, with burrowing holes and sometimes using scrapes or caves. And in South America, the Humboldt penguin is found only along the Pacific coast, and the range of the Humboldt penguin overlaps with that and the Magellan penguin and central Chilean coast, and are considered a vagrant in Ecuador and Colombia. And the Humboldt penguin has been known to live in mixed species colonies, and with Magellan penguins at least 2 different localities south of Chile. And they have been very, very focused on ecotourism, since they're quite obviously people love penguins. And these guys, in terms of penguins, they're very general, like medium size. They get between 56 and 70 centimeters, or 22 to 28 inches, and weigh between 2.9 to 6 kilograms, or 6.4 to 13.2 pounds. And the sex of these guys, you can't really tell them from their plumage, but generally you can see the males are heavier and larger. So that's kind of a general thing. And like other penguins, they make all sorts of different vocalizations, like they bray and things like that, and they'll often molt as well between mid-January and mid-February, and they're confined to land until they finish molting, since they can't really keep water away from them when they're swimming, otherwise they'd probably drown. And as I mentioned, these guys are a top predator where they live in the west coast of South America, and their range is kind of from southern Chile along the dry, arid and coastal regions of the Acanima Desert, and subtropical Isla Foca of North Peru, and the range is now restricted to kind of like offshore islands and the coast, which is affected by the Humboldt current, which provides a constant supply of nutrients and food, which helps provide a lot of the food for these birds, which they tend to eat all sorts of different things, such as cephalopods and crustaceans, and this varies between populations as well. And they are visual hunters, so they'll lead the islands foraging after sunrise, and different populations will have different foraging times, and they'll often have short, shallow dives where they go and find their prey. And failed breeders often take longer dives and deeper dives, longer foraging trips and deeper dives than the ones that have bred, since they need to get back to their babies. And in terms of reproduction, as I mentioned, they live in these loose colonies, with most pairs laying about 2 eggs on the same size, 4 days apart, that require about 41 days of their incubation. While we're doing that, we'll talk about the wonderful babies that we got here. How cute are these little mens? So they lay their eggs from March to December, but also with peaks in April to August, September, due to individuals having a second clutch usually. Half the females successfully have 2 clutches per year, and most are double broods. If a pair loses their egg during the first breeding season, they lay a new clutch within 1 to 4 months, and the incubation sips last on average 2.5 days before one parent takes over. So above 2 days, one will go forage and the other will help take care of the egg, and then they'll swap. And there's really no difference between the contribution between the male and the female. And they generally hatch 2 days apart, little chicks, and the chicks are semi-artificial, and they are usually guarded by a parent while the other forages, and they're fed only once a day. And if they're left unattended, they can be left unattended at a nest site after a certain age, with both parents going off to forage. And some of the threats that these guys face, especially is El Nino and El Nina dynamics, especially with the currents, with climate change as well, that does affect the currents. Also fisheries, often a lot of the fish that could be going to feed the penguins is going to into these nets, especially with bycatch and a lot of these schooling species, and also risks the chance of them getting trapped in these nets. Also, the human presence is that they are very sensitive to people, so they can get easily stressed by people, so people need to keep away from them when they're breeding. Also, the introduction of feral goats, rabbits, rats, and also cats, they affect their habitats. They'll often take their burrows and loosen up the soil, so the burrows of the penguins will crash on them and trap them inside. And also, feral cats and dogs will eat adult chick and fledgling Humboldt penguins. So it's very, very bad. And also the development of industries such as mining and coal has really affected their populations. But luckily they have been given legal protection since the 1970s and are considered endangered, I believe. Endangered or vulnerable? Yeah, they're considered vulnerable. And luckily there has been, of course, some good protections in place. And a lot of species, a lot of mining projects have been kind of put on hold to protect these species. And yeah, and there's also been lots of changes to sustainable fisheries and things like that to try and help them. And yeah, very, very interesting. I like these good penguins. So this was done by Leif and Nicholas Lionrider, making his wonderful return. Really, really good man. And now we're going to be looking at the mammals. So that's all the birds done. Now we're looking at the mammals. So this next one was done by Leif. We have got the yellow-backed duiker. So these wonderful guys over here. So the yellow-backed duiker is a very small forest-dwelling antelope, and the family Bovidae, and they're the most widely distributed of all the species of duiker. And they're found mainly in central to western Africa, where they range from Senegal to western Uganda, and there's possibly a few in Gambia as well. And their range also extends southward into Rwanda, Burundi, Zaire, and most of Zambia. So that's very interesting. And they really have this very interesting convex body shape. They stand taller than the rump at the shoulders. They also have very short horns. They get between 8.5 to 21 centimeters, or 3 to 8 inches in length. And they have this orange crest of hair that looks at the back, which gives them their name. So you can see this yellow rump you can see here. So that's where they get the name, the yellow-backed duiker, from this big rump here. And they've got this orange patch on their head. Very, very interesting. And their coloration is very similar between the sexes, and there's very little sexual dimorphism. And they weigh between 60 to 80 kilograms, which make it the largest of the genus, with these large mouth and jaw musculature. So they're very, very large duiker, the largest duiker. So these guys are also forest living, where they live in mainly mountain, riparian, or rainforests, and try to just hide out in those areas. They can be also found in ocean and bush, isolated forest islands, and clearings in savanna as well. And they're also very flighty and easily threatened, and they will often run blindly from a threat. And they've actually been seen in Los Angeles Zoo. They were found running headlong into the glass of their enclosures, startled. And they've also, in captivity, they're known to form jaw abscesses based on stress. And they're typically active through all times of the day and night, and they live mainly solitary or in couples, and rarely even in small herds. And talking about the babies here, look really wonderful. They breed throughout the year, with many breeding 2 times in a year. The female gives birth to only one oro, or one baby, and 2 offspring, a vegetation period, 1 or 2, I think that's what I mean. 1 or 2 offspring after a gestation of 4 to 7 months. And the calf remains hidden during its first week and is weaned from 3 to 5 months after birth. Sexual maturity happens at about 12 to 18 months in the male and about 9 to 12 months in the female. And they live generally in the wild between 10 to 12 years and up to 22 and a half years in captivity. So as most other antelope, especially forest antelope, they are pretty herbivorous. They feed selectively on plants such as roots, tubers, leaves and buds, and feed mainly on fruits. And they're actually more efficient at digesting these poor quality foods than other duikers, which is very interesting. And they are able to eat lots of large, low quality fruits, which actually makes them hard to keep in captivity because most domesticated fruits aren't well suited for their low fiber diet. So that's another thing about keeping the captivity. And they're also one of the few antelopes that can eat meat, and they will often kill small game such as birds. So that's very interesting. They are considered least concern, I believe, or near threatened actually. They're considered near threatened because they are obviously a very huntable species and the most heavily hunted species across West and Central Africa, since they're a vital food source and a source of income. Although it seems still to be quite common, it's kind of a big issue if it's unsustainable and is hurting their population. So the bushmeat trade can be bad for them. And they have been, in some areas, they are locally extinct. But generally they are doing well. So hopefully, as long as bushmeat doesn't get too out of hand, they should be okay. So really, really wonderful. And I think Leaf did a wonderful job with these duiker. And we got another one from Leaf, and also Mega Game and Rex. We have got the Yucatan spider monkey. So very, very wonderful animal here. So these guys are a subspecies of the Jeffrey's spider monkey, or their own species, depending on the taxonomy, and are one of the largest types of New World monkey. And the Yucatan spider monkey weigh about 9 kilograms, which makes it one of the largest of the New World monkeys, where they have these long arms and prehensile tails, which can support their own weight, with a long and slender body with black hair, with a coarse and over matted looking hair. And you can see, obviously, they got lighter down as well. Their fur is somewhat paler than the Mexican spider monkey, and are usually tan-colored around the eyes and chin. So, is that a female? Let's find a male. We'll talk about a male. Wonderful male. There we are. So, the Yucatan spider monkey is very social. They live in groups of anywhere from 10 to 100 members, with about 20 to 42 on average, with these groups typically being dominated by females who run the foraging patterns of the rest of the group. And male-to-male relationships have also been well documented, where there's a focus on grooming, embracing, arm wrapping, and grappling. And the most successful bonds are between males of similar ages. And these are kind of meant to be affectionate and beneficial bonds to all the animals within the group. And usually it gives a lot more affection given by the younger male, shows a value of respect and of the elders. So the older ones tend to get most of the love. I'm not surprised. And these guys on average reach about 25 years old in the wild, while in captivity they can live up to 35. A female Yucatan spider monkey will produce a baby once every few years, and the infant monkey, as we can see, let's see if we can spot a little baby here. There we are. They're born completely black. Really, really interesting look. And they will cling to their mother for the first 2 or so years of its life, and will only start eating fruit at about 2 years old. They've got quite a long grow up. And these guys, in terms of their diet, they are frugivores. So their diet consists of about 90% fruit and 10% eggs of insects. And in captivity, they actually generally feed on fruits, dog food, and a few vegetables, such as lettuce and cabbage and things like that. Very, very interesting. They also tend to move in a straight line towards the food, and they often orient their movements, foraging areas are visible from their courage vantage point. And they consistently plan out these foraging areas ahead of time, so it's very, very cool. In foraging behavior after a natural disaster, it's like a hurricane, they often show increased splitting up of these groups, and less time was spent moving, and more times the main food source was changed from fruits to leaves. So probably just a way to stay better sheltered. And the Yucatan spider monkey is classed as endangered by the IUCN because of ongoing rapid population decline. And especially around that area, lots of habitat loss due to obviously logging and things like that. So some good conservation programs need to be in place. And last but most definitely not least, we have got a subspecies of tiger, or a population of tiger, you could say. We've got the South China tiger by Havoc, Gaboy, and Mega Gaming Rex. Mega Gaming Rex also made the Yucatan spider monkey along with Leaf. So yeah, we've got some really, really wonderful guys here. So this is the South China tiger. So this is a specific population that is native to southern China, and they mainly inhabited Fujian and a few other provinces, and is listed as critically endangered, and since 1996, and is potentially extinct in the wild, since there's been no wild individual of the South China tiger reported since the late 1980s. But in the late 1990s, their continued survival in the wild was considered unlikely due to low predator prey density, widespread habitat degradation and fragmentation, and also other human pressures, so that's kind of sad. But yeah, these guys were often considered a subspecies, Panthera tigris anamoensis, but since 2017, they've kind of been found to be lumped into other mainland populations of tigers, though there is potentially evidence that there was a population that lived during the Pleistocene that may have interbred with these South China tigers that have some ancient genetics in them, so it's very, very interesting. So they are considered the smallest tiger subspecies from mainland Asia, or population you could say, but is larger than the ones from the Sunda Islands, such as the Sumatran and Javan tigers. Males usually measure between 230 and 265 centimeters, or 91 to 104 inches, and weigh between 130 to 175 kilograms, or 287 to 386 pounds. And females are smaller and measure 220 to 240 centimeters, or 87 to 94 inches, and weigh between 100 to 115 kilograms, or 220 and 254 pounds. And the length of the tail does not usually exceed one half of the head to body length. And yeah, very, very interesting guys here. So as I mentioned, the distribution is kind of around the southern China, around Zhejiang provinces, also the Qilong Mountains and the Yellow River, places like that. And it's also believed that these guys were likely connected to the... what's the other one? Look at these babies, aren't they very cute? Very cute babies. But anyway, we'll keep talking about them. It's also believed that these guys were likely connected to the South Siberian tigers through corridors in the Yellow River Basin throughout the late Pleistocene and Holocene, which has provided intermittent gene flows. That's pretty cool. And sadly, in terms of their population, it's believed in the early 1950s there was believed to be more than 4,000 individuals in the wild, where they kind of took large-scale anti-pest campaigns to try and get rid of these tigers, and along with uncontrolled hunting, deforestation, and reduction in prey, there just led to be more and more fragmentation. Until 1982, there was only believed to be 150 to 200 South China tigers that remained. So yeah, very, very sad story, I think, there. And in 1987, the remnant population was believed to be about 30 to 40 individuals, and was in danger of extinction. And they've generally just try to take as many of them in captivity. And in terms of their other subspecies or populations of tigers, they are obligate carnivores, so they feed on large ungulates, and they also feed on things like wild boar, porcupines, hares, langurs, things like that. And they will generally mate any time of the year, but breeding is most common for these guys at the end of November and the first half of April. And males are generally begin mating at about 5 years old, and females about 4. Offspring is usually born 103 days after mating, with 3 to 6 young being born in the den. And they suckle for at least their first 8 weeks of life, and the mother teaches them how to hunt when they're 6 months old. And at about a year and a half to 2 years old, the cubs will separate from their mother. So, in terms of conservation, these guys were protected by control hunting, kind of. But they were classed as protected in 1977, and hunting was prohibited. And there have been some attempts, but really it was too little too late, and by the time they put these protections in place, the wild population was most likely extinct. But in captivity, that luckily, in May 1986, 17 Chinese zoos had 40 purebred South China tigers in their collections, which included 14 females and 23 males. And these have kind of become the founding population for other South China tigers. In 2005, the population was consisted of 57 individuals that showed sign of inbreeding. And in 2007, the global captive population is going to be 72, with few outside China. And the few seem to be pure because they had been inbreeding with other subspecies of tiger, so to speak. And there actually seems to be a reserve in South Africa that has had a cub born, and they've been trying to rewild them, pretty much trying to train them how to hunt so they live a more natural life, and hopefully potentially may be able to reproduce them back into the wild. And this population has been entered into like a centralized stud book, and because the stud book was established, it was thought that the captive population was too small and lacking in genetic diversity to any reproductive repopulation program to be successful. But since the start of the central registry, more and more South China tigers have been identified in zoos across China, so it's very, very possible that there could be enough genetic diversity to release them into the wild, and that's kind of been part of the project. As I mentioned, with rewilding projects with the Save China's tigers, they've been trying to take tigers that have been in zoos and kind of rehabilitate them and potentially release them into the wild. And there actually is a reserve in South Africa, as they mentioned, the Lau Valley Reserve, where they've kind of been having them and teaching them how to hunt, which is very, very interesting. There's nothing really been attempted like this for large carnivores to reintroduce them to the wild. And lots of people were like, "Ooh, well, that's a bit different. Do they think they'll be able to survive?" But it seems they seem to be doing okay down there. They seem to be hunting and breeding down in the reserve, so they seem to be doing well. And hopefully, if that all goes well, we might have some wild South China tigers back again. A really unique population that I think deserves to be protected, and very, very cute, if I do say so myself. So yeah, just to go over who made this. This was made by Havoc1119, Gaboy, and Mega Game and Rex. And I think this will be a great place to end the video, with all of them sleeping and being very, very happy. Let's have a look at the babies. Well, very, very cute. How adorable. But yeah, I think this would be a great place to end the video. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified when I reload anything. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.